But that, for me, that sort of implies that it's not an exclusive relationship. It shouldn't, or it wouldn't have to be an exclusive relationship. So we can be influenced by all the partly dissolved minds that
absolutely. All of our minds are in contact with each other, just as under the prevailing materialistic paradigm, all our bodies are in contact with each other, and for that reason our bodies affect one another to a greater or lesser extent. Under the consciousness-only model, it's exactly the same principle, but it is all our minds are connected in the field of consciousness, rather than all our bodies being connected in physical space.
Because the last time I was here, I asked you a question about spirituality and the word spirit within the concept of spirituality. And for me, spirit, or spirits, sometimes referred to as guides or whatever you want to call them, angels, or even the darker sides. In a way, I feel that you're suggesting that because the influence can go both ways, there is this, maybe you could call it another realm of consciousness, of minds being interconnected, that we're still under the influence of.
We have to be open to the possibility. And each of our finite minds is limited. Yes, I think that's a statement everybody would agree with. And therefore we have to be open to the possibility that there is more to reality than simply the content of our own individual mind. How could a finite mind legitimately say, all there is my finite mind? Because my finite mind is limited, and therefore it is not in a position to know what exists beyond it. So we have to be open to the possibility that there is more than just the content of our finite minds, but whatever there is still exists in consciousness. Just because it doesn't come within the compass of our own individual mind doesn't mean, as is considered under the materialistic paradigm, that it exists outside consciousness. No, it just means it exists outside our own finite mind, but still in consciousness. Yeah, and there may be very much more to the inside of consciousness than appears in each of our finite minds. After all, our finite minds are very limited instruments. For instance, they only perceive in 4 dimensions. They only perceive in terms of time and space. Now most people think that time and space is an inherent quality of reality. It's not, it's just the filter through which the human mind sees reality. So just as somebody wearing orange-tinted glasses sees orange-looking snow, so a human mind that is wearing 4-dimensional glasses of time and space sees reality in terms of time and space, then forgets that he is wearing the glasses of time and space and believes that time and space exists out there. No, time and space are just the filters through which a human mind perceives reality. If our minds were constructed differently, with only 2 dimensions or 6 dimensions or 12 dimensions, we would see a different reality. We can't imagine that reality because everything we imagine is filtered through our 4-dimensional minds and appears appears consistent with those 4 dimensions. So everything we see shares the limitations of the mind through which it is seen.
Yeah, I understand this all, but when talking about you saying thoughts in a way arise from what you call yourself, from nowhere else. You can't say that I can see my thoughts coming from outside myself. Having said this, and referring to the conversation that you had with this lady behind me, that there is the sort of interaction going on between her and her brother.
Yes.
That she might actually hear in her inner heart what he is saying to her.
Yes, yes. But remember, when I say your thoughts arise from yourself, I don't mean from yourself, your finite mind. I mean from yourself, infinite consciousness. Now, for instance, we were talking at lunch, there were a group of us talking at lunch, and there were a couple of people, I can't see you, who there you are, attended a retreat last year of mine on the West Coast, and they're very interested in alchemy. Now, I've never been particularly interested in alchemy. To my knowledge, I have never used the word alchemy. It's just not part of my repertoire. However, for some reason on this retreat, I'd forgotten this actually, but they reminded me, I used the analogy of alchemy. It just came to me. I mean, as you know, I'm a little repetitive with my metaphors, but very occasionally a new metaphor comes to me, a new word, a new model or something. So on this occasion, just spontaneously in the moment, without my ever having thought about it again, the analogy with alchemy came to me, and apparently I started using the analogy of the example of alchemy as an analogy for whatever it was we were speaking. And these two, who are very interested in alchemy, were amazed by this, because it was so close to what they had been thinking. Now, was it just a coincidence that, never having thought about alchemy, or hardly ever having thought about alchemy before, the idea just came to me from nowhere? Yes, it could have been a coincidence, but these kind of things happen so frequently that too frequently for them just to be coincidences. And it's not at all impossible that a thought that was in somebody else's mind at the time, it was not in my mind, but it was in the same field of consciousness in which my mind exists. And therefore, when I was trying to explain something and possibly looking for a new way, or let's say open to a new way to describing it, that there was a kind of opening in my mind, an availability for something new to come into it from outside its own limitations, but from within the field of consciousness in which it arose, and that it, as it were, picked up the idea that was floating around in the nearby field. Now, I'm describing it in rather simplistic terms. Obviously, it's a very limited model. But is there anyone here who has never had the experience in life of walking with an intimate friend, and you're just silent together, and then a thought pops up into your mind about something that you and your friend haven't conversed about for a long time, and as the thought comes to your mind, you speak the thought, and your friend says, "Oh, I was just thinking of her." Or that you get an email in your inbox one morning of a friend who lives on the other side of the world that you haven't seen for many years, and you happen to be thinking of the friend. Has anyone here not had an experience like that? You see, that they're too frequent to be dismissed just as coincidences, but the materialistic paradigm has to dismiss these kind of experiences because they cannot be explained under the model which believes that our minds are sealed containers located in and derived from our separate physical bodies. So they just have to be dismissed. But you can't have a true science which dismisses such a common element of experience.
One of the reasons why I'm asking this, I work with what they call schizophrenic patients, and they talk to me about the voices that they hear in their heads, and the way that when they walk the streets, that they say that they can pick up the thoughts of the people surrounding them. I can make the difference with what you can call projection, but sometimes people refer to the same thing that you are talking about now. Like, I was answering the question that my neighbor was about to ask me. And there's a lot of confusion about what you should call pathological and what is maybe extra sensitive to what's around you. So what's the barrier, so to speak? When you look upon those people as being ill or sick, and when do you feel it to be a natural part of openness?
Yes, our culture tends to look on such people as being ill and sick because they don't conform to what we consider to be the norm. But they are. There could be another interpretation that such people have minds or are minds whose boundaries are a little more porous than most minds. Now, all minds are porous. No mind is a sealed container, but some minds could be said to be more porous than others, more open to influences coming from the shared medium of consciousness in which all minds exist. And that increased sensitivity is, for instance, is what makes an artist. But there could be this increased sensitivity can also be problematic because it makes everyday living difficult, and our culture draws a line and says as long as you're on this side of the line, even if you're an artist, you're okay as long as you're on this side. But we draw a line, and anything on the other side of the line is that they are sick or unwell. But they're not sick or unwell. Their minds are just configured differently. Their minds don't have the same boundary that our minds have. And that gives them both great sensitivity, but it also sometimes makes their lives and the lives of people around them very difficult because they don't fit into our way of living.
And if you think there is this mutual interaction going on, some of those clients feel that like they attract everything that's bad in this world, like talking about evil or entities. It can get the shape in their belief and their experience of these entities haunting them.
It's true to a certain extent that think about each of our minds like a mini field within consciousness, made of consciousness. But each of our minds has its own particular shape, depending on the things that we've thought about, the training we've had, the experiences. So all of our minds are conditioned or shaped slightly differently, and depending on the shape of each of our minds, so what is downloaded, so to speak, into each of our mind varies. For instance, I've spent 40 years exploring the nature of myself, exploring the nature of reality, exploring the Vedantic and Tantric traditions. And I've been doing this intensely for 40 years. It's not, but I have paid very little attention to, let's say, medicine, or Chinese politics, or astrophysics. Now, it's not surprising, therefore, that from time to time my mind is inspired with new understanding relating to the nature of reality, or the nature of the self, or the Vedantic tradition. But my mind is never inspired by understanding about Chinese politics or astrophysics. Why? Because the pathways, my mind is not shaped in that way. I would never receive inspired guidance about astrophysics. My mind just doesn't have the tools to handle that kind of inspiration. But another mind, who has been studying physics for 40 years will be open and susceptible to new inspiration. So in this sense, it's not that, I don't really like the formulation that we attract. It's not really that we attract it, but it's more that our minds are shaped in a certain way, and as a result of that shaping, certain knowledge or information is, as it were, downloaded, appears in such a mind.
In a way, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. That when you have this core belief that you are not good as you are, that you are more open to the proof from the outside world.
Yes.
That sustains or...
Yes, and in fact, such a person who is, let's say, has a very negative self-image, and who finds, as you suggest, confirmation of their negative self-image repeatedly appearing in the world. From another person's point of view, that same person is receiving constant affirmations from the world about what a wonderful person they are, but they never notice them. Their friend notices them all the time. Can't you see that you did this so well? Can't you see how friendly that person was? But the person who has the negative self-image just doesn't see them. Doesn't see those confirmations from the world. They only see that aspect of experience that conforms to, and therefore confirms their own feeling of being unworthy or unlovable.
Thank you.
Just going on a little bit from what you said, because it's very interesting, your questions. What we've come in our culture to consider to be the personal unconscious or the collective unconscious are realms of our own minds, realms of our own psyches that lie within our psyche but outside the compass of our waking state minds. In other words, they're not available to our waking state, but nevertheless they lie, as it were, in the depths of our mind or at the periphery of our mind, and they sometimes make intrusions into our waking state.
Yeah.
And that is so both for an artist. In fact, an artist is someone who is whose minds are sufficiently porous and open to be sensitive to the deeper realms of the psyche, both the personal unconscious, but more important, the collective unconscious, which is not unconscious, it is in consciousness, but is outside the waking state mind.
Is that what we call inspiration?
An artist is someone whose mind is sufficiently porous to be sensitive to information from the collective unconscious, that is the conscious field that each of our minds shares, but which is outside our waking state minds. And an artist is someone who brings that knowledge into the sphere of the waking state mind to be shared with humanity.
Yeah.
But also that there are the people you were referring to earlier, who our culture considers to be sick, are also people whose minds are porous and are sensitive to a realm of the psyche that lies outside the normal boundary of the waking state mind. And of course our dreams are one of the ways that both the so-called personal unconscious, that is the conscious content of our mind that lies just outside the waking state mind. It's not really unconscious, it's just outside the waking state mind. And our dreams, the contents of the so-called personal unconscious and the contents of the so-called collective unconscious, which lies below the personal unconscious, our dreams are a way of allowing that material to come up into our field of perception.
Yeah, because it's my experience, more and more people, also the people I see in my practice, are talking about, for instance, substances like ayahuasca, and they all report the same sort of experience, like entering this other realm that you're referring to, that seems to be present for all of us, and they're talking about the same experience in terms of the contact they share, or they feel with her higher intelligence or spirits or guidance or whatever. And it's not a singular statement.
Yes.
It's what I hear all around me.
Imagine a sheet of paper, a white sheet of paper. It represents infinite consciousness. There's nothing on the sheet of paper, but the sheet of paper has the ability to vibrate within itself, and that vibration creates fields of a certain frequency and amplitude. So there is a kind of vibrating sheet of paper, and each of our minds imagines that each of our minds are like circles drawn on the piece of paper that bring into focus a particular aspect of this vibrating whole. Now, the circle in each of our minds are drawn with a perforated hole, because none of our minds are sealed units. But when we fall asleep at night, or when we meditate, or when we have a glass of wine, or take ayahuasca, or the circle expands slightly. And as it expands, more of the field of the white paper is contained within the circle. It was always in the paper, it was always in consciousness, but our mind has not gone anywhere, it hasn't entered a new realm. It's just simply expanded. The waking state mind has expanded, and now what was previously outside the mind, and was therefore considered to be the unconscious, in fact it was always in consciousness, is now appears in that person's mind. So the mind has simply expanded, and as the finite mind is expanding and beginning to make its way back to infinite consciousness. So infinite consciousness contracts into one of these little circles, and in doing so, it just makes a little part of the entire contents of consciousness available, and then as it relaxes. As we fall asleep at night, the mind relaxes, it expands, more and more of what was previously the personal or collective unconsciousness comes into the mind, and then in time the mind expands completely and it goes back to the white paper. And then there is this contraction again. But it's all in the white paper. The mind never comes in contact with anything that took place outside the white paper. There is nothing outside the white paper.